In this video, we're going to talk about query parameters and response model in FastAPI. My name is Andrew. Let's start. That is the third video in the course where we talk about FastAPI, and in the last video, we talked about dynamic URLs and pydantic models, so structured data and dynamic URLs. Today, we're going to talk about query parameters and response model, two of the most important things in FastAPI, which are going to be used very often when you develop your applications. So let's start with our code. I have some code here, and let me quickly explain it. We create our FastAPI application, and we have our models, user schema and full user schema. So the basic idea here is that user schema inherits, or user schema has all the public information, and full user schema has all the information about the user. So sometimes you have your private fields, for example, password. You don't want to show password to anyone on the internet, because that password can allow other users to log into your account. And the basic idea is that we split our entity, so entity user, into two different schemas. The one with user schema has the basic information, ID and username, and the one with the full user schema name has all the information. It inherits from user schema, so it also adds ID and username, and will also show our email and balance. So once again, full user schema is going to be shown to the user itself, or to admin, or to some manager, and user schema is going to be shown to everyone. You're going to use that approach very often, because when you want to, for example, create a new user, what you are going to say is user create schema. You can have user update schema. You can have user information schema and all that stuff. So you can create multiple schemas for one entity in pydantic, but be very careful with that. However, we're going to talk about that in the next video. So for now, all we have is user and full user schema. So full user schema, once again, contains all of the information about our user. Then we have our users list with two users which were created using full user schema. But once again, we want the full information, so all the information about our user. I have two users here, and I also have a FastAPI route that I copied from the previous video, which has a dynamic URL with ID, and we basically get our user using his or her ID. Now let's run our application. Let's go to the browser. If we go to user/1, we go to our first user. If we go to user/0, so using their ID or index in the list, we go to our user with ID 0. So the data is different and everything is correct. However, there is a little bit of a problem here. The problem is that right now, anyone that has a connection to the Wi-Fi, connection to the internet, or knows about that web application can see your balance and your email. So basically what I can do is go to the user that I want and see his email. That is private information. We don't want to show our email to anyone. Or I can see his balance. So let's say that I have $1 million in my bank account. I don't want you to know that I have $1 million in my bank account. That is why balance and email should be private. But right now, anyone can see them. You just put the ID in the dynamic URL right here. And that is a problem. So how do we change that? The problem is that right now, we return users from ID. So basically saying, get the entity, get the object, Python variable that is in that list with that index. But the problem is that we have full user schema here. We don't have user schema. And what we want to do is use response model. So what you do is you put a comma in your app-get decorator and put response model as user. Sorry, user schema. So response model is user schema. And what does that mean? That means that doesn't matter what we return, doesn't matter what entity is users from ID, doesn't matter what entity is in the list, it's going to be converted to user schema. So let me run my application once again. Let me go here and let me refresh the page. You can see that I don't have my email or my balance. If I go to user/0, it's the same stuff. And the thing is that response model allows you to put a specific entity as your response. And why is it so important? Because when you're going to work with databases, with data storages, with other entities, with pagination, with lots of stuff, you're probably going to want to implement your own response model. So you're going to have to not implement, but just show what kind of model you want to return. Because when you work with a database, it's basically the same stuff as I showed you here. You have your password, you have your private information inside of the database, and you query that information. So you query the data from your data storage, and typically you work with a full object inside of your Python application. But you want to only show some kind of information to the final user, to the user that uses our API, uses our web application. And that is why response model is very important. So you're going to use it when connecting to databases, when using pagination, when changing your data in any way, shape, or form. You're going to have to use response model. That's everything that you need to know about response model. So once again, what you do is you just basically put any kind of type. So in our case, it's a pydantic model as your response model. And it's always better to put a response model in your FastAPI routes. But that is the first topic of today's video. Now let's go to the second one, which is query parameters. So the thing is, sometimes you want to show the full information about the user to some kind of administrator, to a manager, or to someone who manages that account. If username Andrew and ID 0 is my own account, I want to see that information. Or if I'm an admin inside of that web application, I want to see the full information about the user. But I cannot do that since we use response model here. And if I remove response model, of course, we can see all the information about our user because we return full user schema from our list. What we want to do is have some kind of a dynamic variable that allows us to either show our full information, so all the info about the user, or only show some kind of information about our user, about our account. And how do we do that? With query parameters. So what you have is your dynamic URL. But we also have a thing called query parameters. So sometimes when you go to websites, you see like google.com question mark, and then you see your variables. So those are query parameters. So for example, A is 1 and B is true and C is 1.2. A, B, and C are query parameters. When you go to website, you're basically saying, okay, I want to query your information with these parameters. It's kind of like dynamic URLs, but a little bit better in some sense, because dynamic URL shows the structure of your application. But those are just the variables that assist your request. And how do we distinguish query parameters? You have your question mark, name of the parameter, equals to the value. So in our case, we have three parameters, A, which is 1, B, which is true, and C, which is 1.2. We have that ampersand or and sign in between those parameters, and that's how they work. So most of you know about them, but how to use them in FastAPI? Actually, it's very, very easy. The only thing that you have to do in order to use them in FastAPI is just basically add a variable. So you have your dynamic variables first, then you have your query parameter variable. For example, isAdmin, which is going to be Boolean. And let's say that it's false by default. So isAdmin is a query parameter that will allow us to show if the user is an admin or not. It's not a good practice when it comes to security, but for our case, it's not a big deal. So what I'm going to do is say if isAdmin, then return users from ID. So return the user that has that ID that is on that index, or else return user schema. And here I'm gonna say ID is users from ID.id and username is users from ID.username. If our query parameter isAdmin is true, then we return users from ID. Otherwise, we return user schema. So full user schema here. Let's test our application. If I just refresh my page, I see the basic information about the user. If I go to user/1, basic information once again. But if I go to user/1 and then question mark is admin is true, I see information, the full user schema of this account, of this user, of this record. The same goes for user/0. And that is how it works. If I put isAdmin to false, I'm not gonna see it. Or if I remove it completely. And that is how query parameters work in FastAPI. Why are they so important? Because they're gonna be used a lot in your applications. You don't always want to use dynamic URLs because sometimes you want to add some auxiliary information, like is it an admin, or what kind of page do you want when it comes to pagination, to limiting your results, to all that kind of stuff. You want to add some auxiliary information, and that is why query parameters are so popular. Right here, in this FastAPI route, there are multiple problems, multiple issues that you have to distinguish. So write them down in the comments, and the more issues you write, the better it is for you. The person who writes most issues is the winner. My name is Andrew. You can find that code in the GitHub in the description down below. Use my PyAssimilator library in GitHub, the library that allows you to use the best patterns and enhance your code. Thank you for watching, and bye-bye.